Secretary of State Bill Galvin is with us in studio this morning. Let's go on the record. COVID-19 has turned the job of running an election into round-the-clock crisis management. But this isn't Galvin's first rodeo. How he's making sure that your vote is counted. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. We are down to the wire in the 2020 election. Unfortunately, there is no end in sight to the pandemic. So, as always, we continue to follow our strict social distancing protocols in Studio C. This morning, Bill Galvin joins us. He's at the center desk. He's more than 6 feet away. He has served as Secretary of State since 1995. And as we said at the top of the show, this is not his first rodeo. He's been around. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us again. So we're now 2 days out from the end of the voting period. Give us a quick snapshot of roughly how many people have voted, both in early voting as well as mail-in, and what percentage do you estimate this will be in the eventual total vote count by Tuesday night?
Well, it's more than 45% have voted already. We're approaching 900,000 early votes in person, well over a million. And more than a million, 1.1 million, 2 that have been received by mail. I've said consistently that I thought the turnout would exceed the 2016 turnout, which was a record. It was 3.3 million. I've always believed this will exceed it. I'm more convinced of that than ever.
So nationwide, as you say, it looks like we could break a record. Do you think that it could be like 3.5 million, maybe more? It
could be. I mean, surely I'm going to look at the final figures after everything is reconciled over the weekend and see where we're at, and we'll figure it out. What I've been struck by, and I think it's not just here in Massachusetts but throughout the country, is the enthusiasm, the determination of voters despite the COVID situation to vote. The early voting numbers here and across the country have been overwhelming. The determination of voters, despite all the problems, despite all the false rumors about the accuracy of vote by mail, despite all of the problems that have been experienced, is a telling testimony to the commitment of voters and their citizenship.
Well, and to that very point, the lines that we just showed just a few minutes ago in West Roxbury on a Tuesday night, a random Tuesday night after 5 o'clock in the evening. I mean, that's impressive. People want to come out and vote. They clearly do. I want to talk about something that was in the news a couple of days ago. There was a fire in one of the drop boxes in Boston. Only a few ballots were, I don't want to say only, that's not fair. A few ballots were destroyed. Were those voters able to send in replacement ballots?
Yes, we reached out to people. Boston did as well, through Boston. We worked with Boston on that. I had expressed some concern about drop boxes previous to that unfortunate episode. And subsequent to that, we put out a further directive regarding drop boxes to make sure they're in secure places. I want to emphasize, though, drop boxes have been extremely helpful in this cycle. We never had drop boxes for ballots before, but it's given voters the opportunity to return their ballot without having to rely upon the mails, to be sure that the ballot's going to be received, and without having to make contact with public employees or of any kind. So it's been very, very helpful in achieving the goals that we've had.
To that point, do you think it's here to stay for future elections?
Well, certainly the concepts are there. We're going to have to assess everything after this election and see what we've learned, just like we did after the primary. We had a very successful experience in the primary, not just with the drop boxes, but with the whole episode of voting and vote by mail. But yet, after the primary, we had convened a series of conferences amongst our local election officials, and we exchanged best practices. We talked about things that went badly, things that went better, and things that went best. And that's kind of what you have to do if you're going to make sure this works.
And speaking of that, during the primary, thousands of ballots arrived too late or were rejected, and there were some problems in some communities, for example, like Franklin, that the ballots weren't counted in time.
Right.
So are you satisfied tonight as we head to Tuesday that the problems have been fixed?
Well, first of all, let me speak of the rejection. Some of them were rejected because voters voted in person. In fact, a significant number of them. Some of them were rejected because they had no signature on it. That's an essential part of voting by mail. The Franklin situation was, nothing was rejected. The clerk there was not competent enough to deal with the situation as it existed at the time. And my office went down to make sure every ballot was counted to the satisfaction not only of all the voters, but indeed of the candidates involved in that race. We surely understand, and we've been using some of the experiences we've had from that to make sure that every ballot is being logged in as soon as possible, and I assure you they all will be counted as they were.
So do you think most of these clerks or these election officials in these cities and towns that struggled during the primary, they've been they understand what the problems are and the problems have been fixed there?
Yes. I mean, I think, first of all, without them, this couldn't have happened. It's the work done by local election officials has been very, very laborious. It's given voters the convenience of not having to go out and vote in person at the polls. The reality, however, is that you learn things, and they learn things, and we all learn things, and that's why I think it was both successful in September and hopefully will be successful now.
You just mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. There are reports about intrusions into voting systems in other swing states, not here, but there seems to be more of a concern about public confidence in the results in those states than actual successful hacking. What worries you more, the perception or the actual hacking?
Well, of course, the hacking, if there were to be hacking of systems, although we are on a paper system, so it's not a situation where our voting equipment is hackable as much as other supporting systems. The perception is a concern, though, because whenever you have some concern on the part of voters about the integrity of the electoral process, it undermines the result, it undermines public confidence. So I think to the extent that the word has been used by some candidates in this race, one in particular, that vote by mail isn't reliable or not safe or fraudulent, none of which is true. You know, I'm so impressed by the tens of millions of people in this country who've taken the time to go out and vote to make sure their vote's counted and their commitment to having a vote. I think that speaks loudly to the reality of people wanting to vote and the legitimacy of their vote.
So let's talk about, I want to play the if game, and I want to frame it, you know, if this, then that, and I don't want to get 2 steps ahead, but if Joe Biden does win on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or whatever, if Joe Biden is the next president and offers Senator Elizabeth Warren a cabinet position, can you go through the logistics of how she would be replaced as a Massachusetts senator?
Yes. First of all, we've been through this twice before, as you know, the death of Senator Kennedy and then the resignation of Senator Kerry. And it's the same procedure. There are a couple of significant differences. The state statute requires that a special election has to be held within 145 to 160 days of the date of the vacancy, which is controlled by the date of the letter of resignation. In 2013, that resulted in a special election being held in June that elected Senator Markey. In 2010, it elected Senator Brown at the time in a special election that was held in the middle of January. So the date will be controlled by the date of the vacancy, and the timeline is very clear. The big difference is that in those two races, in those two situations, there was a gubernatorial appointment. The immediate issue is the governor will get to appoint an interim senator. And the gubernatorial appointment is clearly within the right of the governor to do. In those two races, the two people who were appointed deliberately announced that they would not be candidates. That's not a legal requirement. So quite conceivably, a person who would be appointed could well run.
So if, let's say that Elizabeth Warren does get a cabinet position, she goes through the confirmation process, the earliest that there would be an election, it'd be the spring or the summer. Is that fair to say? I
think that's fair. I mean, if you look at, obviously the confirmation would probably rely upon the new Senate coming in January. The inauguration is the 20th of January, so you start looking at those kinds of dates, which would be the most probable dates.
And again, I'm not putting any carts before any horse, but everyone is eligible to be appointed by the governor, including the governor, right?
Yes.